This is our last event for Equity Week. We hope that you continue to have the opportunity to engage with us, learn with us, and share your own stories as we work together collectively to build South Bend's financial empowerment blueprints and center. For tonight's event, we will discuss and learn more about the racial wealth divide and its local impacts. We have a number of subject matter experts that you will hear from this evening discussing banking, housing, and the financial health of the Black community. At this time, I would like to introduce our partners from Cities of Financial Empowerment, Sol Valera Ramos and Tamara Lindsay. I also would like to mention that we have our partners from the United Health Services that are here to provide services to members of our deaf community. So we do have American Sign Language interpreters on site if that is a service that you require. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is, it's nice to be introduced. My name is Sol Valera Ramos. I am with Cities for Financial Empowerment Fund. We are so incredibly happy to be here with y'all. We are an organization that focuses on working with local governments across the United States to support them to embed financial empowerment into their municipal work. We've done this in a couple of different areas, from asset building, safe banking, financial education, and a lot of the work is really around working with municipalities and bringing up what their priorities are, what is already out there, helping them become more of a convener to expand their financial empowerment work. The City Start work is really what the team has been doing, is focused around creating a blueprint around financial empowerment, connecting with the stakeholders in the room and in the city and residents, hearing what's out there, hearing what's already happening, and really coming together and making that a priority. We are so excited to be here and be part of this event and hear from y'all. The South End team has already done so much. We are happy to be able to join the last equity event today. And look forward to starting today's conversation. Thank you.
Now work money.
Good evening, and that may be the shortest introduction, so we appreciate that. We're going to get into the meat of the discussion quickly, so I'll be brief as well, but it's great to see so many of you here. We know that this is the group that's really been moving South Bend forward for some time, so it's good to get together and assess where we are and where we still want to get to together, and we're glad that you're here tonight. I do want to thank the Engagement and Economic Empowerment team, and for me personally, when I formed the team when I was over in community investment, it's a little strange not to have Alpina, at the helm here, but Antonius was actually started in the city in the Triple E team, then moved to the D&I team, and is now with the Growth and Opportunity team. So we appreciate everything going on in our Department of Community Investment and for making the progress that's going on, including this work on coming up with an empowerment, a financial empowerment blueprint for our city. And that's exciting work, and may or may not be fully in conjunction with the King Center renovations, but a lot of exciting things happening on our city's west side and in our community, and we're just so grateful that all of you are here and ready to move our city forward together. And I also forgot, CDFI Friendly, also something that came out originally out of the Triple E team. So Sam, thanks for being here from CDFI Friendly. So all sorts of good things going on, and we need to see more of that and look forward to the discussion and the progress to come. And I know there'll be a lot of work for each and every one of us, and I see some people who have done a lot of work already, and you may be getting tired, but we still need you to step forward and keep moving our city forward. So thank you.
Now, of course, I couldn't be that short, guys. I'd like to say good evening and thank you for coming to our Racial Wealth Divide panel. Today's discussion is much like Tuesday night's discussion with our residents. It's a conversation like many before in acknowledging our social contract has changed, or better, that our social contract must change. This change should be an acknowledgement of our economic reality and belief that starting with an imperfect union does not bind us to the fate of those who precede us. Today is about acknowledging that without the full participation of Black residents in our city, the ambition to build a community which will persist as a regional leader, which attracts the talent and has the capacity to meet the mark of the new century, is unlikely. Today we acknowledge that Black financial empowerment is essential to South Bend's business, governance, and not just to our moral code. Our recent award of $75,000 by Cities for Financial Empowerment is the third grant our city has received from Bloomberg Philanthropies to enhance our work. The first was the Mayor's Challenge, where under the guidance of now Mayor Mueller, but then Executive Director of Community Investment, we worked on two initiatives, both centered on protecting the vulnerable yet diligent efforts of low to moderate income South Bend families. As the title of tonight's event brings to our attention wealth, or the divide between those with wealth and those without, there's a common understanding that when we begin to speak about vulnerable populations, we have a shared understanding that far too often that group of Americans is an otherized group, and it has somehow transformed them into those who have yet to establish themselves. But instead, they are victims of anything other than a willful act of neglect on our behalf, be it a Great Depression, an Oliver Plow or a Studebaker closing, a nationwide economic crisis, or more recently, the COVID pandemic. It is these things that have separated our city from its greatest potential, not racism or supremacy, or the half measures we have taken to undergird those who have least benefited from the public policy which enriched immigrants to pursue the American dream. During our break, or at the end of today's presentation, please take note of the Boost and Blocks chronology our team has put together. There you will see that at each time in our shared history, Black communities have made incredible strides to establish vibrant and stable lives. And each time, the ground beneath them or forces beyond their control stripped away the earliest of their building blocks, forcing entire communities to economically regress decades. Today, we are gathered as a community of resource providers who have some of the tools, and I believe all of the will, to craft programming that isn't a half measure, which stops the bleeding and prevents the harm. We are a group who can prevent the next gentrification cycle, not by housing policy alone, but building wealth in Black families and businesses. We can look to our initiatives and our objectives and say this will improve the moment and reshape the future. Through this grant, the City of South Bend, in partnership with your institutions and agencies, we will explore the structure of South Bend wealth, review the supports that we provide, ask our residents how we can help, acknowledge where we could do more, author a blueprint for financial empowerment, and much like we've done as a country, rework the deal so that this union is fit to meet the challenges ahead. I would like to acknowledge my team working on the financial empowerment blueprint: Dominique Edwards, Alkina Aldrich, Marty Mecklenburg, Marty Kennedy, Joe Russo, Lori Chalier, Eric Levitch, and Caleb Bauer. Specifically to my white colleagues, I want to thank you for understanding the importance of this work and for having the humility to push Black voices ahead of your own. I believe that you do this not as a charitable endeavor, but because you have seen other efforts discounted, because it was important to have Black professionals as decision makers at the table as a result of an initiative, but only if they were willing to be dispassionate and calm as they worked among affluents and slept in your poverty. Thank you to the Cities for Financial Empowerment members, Soul and Tomorrow, who have traveled a good distance to support our institutional partners to include equity and wealth building in their already life-changing social aid program. Thank you to our city and county representatives for your support of the Financial Empowerment Blueprint. And lastly, and most importantly, thank you to the residents of our city who have chosen to make South Bend their homes and display belief that this is the community where the future can be what they envision. Next up will be Garvester Kelly, who will be our moderator for our first panel, and he will be introduced to Kristen Brody from the Chicago Fed.
Thank you, Antonio. So I was wondering why I was the only one sitting on the stage. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gar Kelly. I am Senior Advisor for Community and Economic Development at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. I work in the Community Development and Policy Studies area where we research issues that impact low and moderate income communities, but we also seek to promote access to financial services and credit. We're no stranger to South Bend. We've held a number of symposiums for the community. We've had an inclusive economies focus group. We've also did a symposium on affordable housing over at South Bend Heritage. And we also held a symposium on community development finance in smaller markets. And we would love to say that that opened the door for the formation of community CDFI-friendly South Bend with SAM. But I'm not here to talk about all of that. I'm here to introduce my colleague, Dr. Kristen Brody, who is a senior economist and economic advisor and the director of our Economic Mobility Project. She most recently served as a fellow at the Brookings Institution, performing research and analysis on areas that include the racial wealth gap, the return to education, investment, and disparate economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic. She's a lecturer at Spelman College, but also she's lectured at Alabama A&M University, Dillard University, Dominican University, Fort Valley State University, Howard University, Kentucky State University, and she's a visiting faculty member at Jiangsu Normal University in China. I'm going to pause here, and I'd like you to join me in welcoming Kristen Brody.
To be shorter, some of those schools we need to just say HBCUs or something. But thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my presentation. Hopefully you can see it. Can everyone see the presentation? It doesn't show up for me, so Gar, if you could just let me know. If everyone can see it, I'll get started.
Yes, they can see it.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to present some economic facts about the U.S. racial wealth gap. And I will just say some of this information may seem outdated, but much of it is based on the Survey of Consumer Finances, which comes out every 3 years. So the last time that it came out was 2019. Some of the data is from the U.S. Census. So we will see new data next year. So we know that the COVID-19 pandemic created a global health and financial crisis, and both of those things vary based on race when we look at the impact. The health impact of the pandemic had a greater effect on people of color, with racial and ethnic minorities in the U.S. having had higher rates of infection and death caused by COVID-19 than their white counterparts. Black and Hispanic workers were more likely to work in the service sector and customer-facing jobs, and less likely to be able to telework, which put them at higher risk of contracting and dying from COVID-19. But for many years prior to the pandemic, there were large racial disparities in various economic indicators, including income and wealth. So we know that the pandemic didn't cause the racial wealth gap, but it may have exacerbated it. Black people in America have on average lower earnings, lower rates of home ownership, less access to banking services, pay more for credit, have lower levels of retirement savings, and have higher loan denial rates than their white counterparts. All of these factors contribute to the racial wealth gap. So let's start with the racial wealth disparity. This slide just shows you median net worth by race or ethnicity in 2019. And at that time, we saw that white households have 5.2 times greater wealth than the average Hispanic household, and 7.8 times greater wealth than the average Black household. And if we were to look at average wealth, we would see that the disparity is even larger. So in 2019, the mean or average net worth for the average white household was $980,550 compared to $165,540 for the average Hispanic household and $142,330 for the average Black household. So both of those statistics show you that there is a significant racial wealth gap. So this slide is median before tax family income, and as you can see, Black people throughout the time period, and this starts in '89, had the lowest median before tax income. There were a couple of times, like in '92, 2001, 2004, and 2013, where the number was similar to Hispanic people, but throughout that time, we see that it has been the lowest. And so we're building something here, right? If we see that Black people have lower wealth, where does wealth come from? It comes from earning income. It is the main thing. And so as Black people earn lower incomes, how do we expect them to save or invest in housing or send their children to school or any of these things? So this slide shows the disparity in home ownership. So in 2019, median total asset holdings were about $228,000, with 98.7% of American families owning at least one financial asset. And for many American families, home ownership is the biggest component of wealth. So in the first quarter of 2022, the home ownership rate was 65.4%. At 74%, the home ownership rate was highest for white Americans, followed by 59.4% for Asian Americans, 56% for Americans of two or more races, 49.1% for Hispanic Americans, and 44.7% for Black Americans. So if a home is the biggest asset for many families, and we see that African Americans are the lowest, that's not a good thing. So now let's look at retirement accounts, right? So we know that people can save for retirement through their job, through a 401k, or on their own, or through various IRAs or other types of thrift accounts. There are various ways that people can save for retirement through work. And so on this slide, we see that Black and Hispanic workers have lower rates of retirement account ownership. So according to a 2019 report from the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College, the average household nearing retirement with a 401k had about $135,000 in that 401k or IRA assets. But across races, retirement account ownership is highest for the 35 to 54 age group. So, but we see again that at all ages, that Black and Hispanic people especially, are less likely to even have a retirement account. Now let's look at the actual numbers. This is retirement savings by race. This is from 2019. So on average, white non-Hispanic households had $80,000. Black households had $35,000. And Hispanics only had $31,000. So this slide looks at banking status. So this is whether or not a person has a bank account, meaning are they fully banked, that they have access to checking and savings, they're underbanked, meaning that maybe they have a checking account but not a savings account, or they don't have an account at all. And so when we look at white people, we see that only 3% of the white population in 2020 was unbanked compared to 13% for the Black population, 9% for Hispanic, 3% for Asian. And we also see when we look at fully banked, That for white people, it was 88%, Asian Americans, 89% had full access, versus for African Americans, it was only 59% or 70%, for Hispanic. So if you just think about how do you cash your payroll check, or where do you go to get a loan if you don't have a bank account? So what we found was that for people who live in neighborhoods where there are fewer banks or don't have a bank account, they're more likely to use higher credit options like payday lenders or check cashers, title loans that charge much higher interest rates than your average bank would for loans. So even when minorities do have bank accounts, we see that their average monthly bank account fees are higher. So Hispanic Americans pay the highest fees at $15.85. Black people pay $12.30 compared to $5.29 for white Americans. So again, Black and Hispanic people have lower wealth, less income, less likely to have access to a bank, less likely to have a retirement savings account, and if they do, they're likely to have less money in it. And when they do have a bank account, they're paying even more to be able to access their funds. So let's look at credit scores, which just exacerbate the issue. We see that in 2021, Asian people had the highest average credit score at 745, followed by White Americans at 734. Hispanic people at 701, and Black Americans had the lowest average credit scores, 677. Higher education, we know, can be the key to higher incomes and ways to buy a home and build wealth. But when we look at this slide, we see that African Americans had the highest installment loan rates, right? So our research also showed that Black people were less likely to get a baccalaureate degree. And when they do get that degree, they're more likely to take out a student loan. When they do take out a student loan, that loan is likely to be for a higher amount. So it just starts the cycle again, that you get out of school and you owe this loan amount, your income is lower. How then are you supposed to buy a house? Or how then are you supposed to start saving to send your own children to school? So by analyzing socioeconomic factors that impact the racial disparity in net worth between households and historically structured factors that block opportunities for African Americans to reach economic mobility, we're hopeful that policymakers will take this data and make some recommendations toward reducing the racial wealth gap. But really, none of these things alone will solve the issue. They must all be taken together, and we must also deal with the impact of racism and discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. So we heard from my colleague, Kristen Brody, regarding the breadth, the depth, the connectedness of the racial wealth divide that can leave us overwhelmed. However, we have some individuals and organizations that are working through this challenge to deliver services and credit to improve the economic conditions of individuals and communities. And so as such, on our panel today, we have Sam Centellas, Executive Director of the CDFI Friendly South Bend, Keith Broadnax, Senior Vice President of Business Development at Sanair, Marco Mariani, Executive Director of South Bend Heritage Foundation, Pam Meyer, Director of Neighborhoods for the city, of South Bend, and Louis Zapata, Vice President of Financial Wellness at First Source Bank. So the flow of our panel is going to be as follows. Each panelist will introduce themselves and then share how their organization is working to improve the economic condition of South Bend's residents, specifically addressing how these work efforts seek to close the racial wealth divide. We'll do this for about 20 minutes, and then the last 10 minutes we'll spend for addressing questions and comments from the audience. And so let's start to the far left, my far left, with Keith Broadnax.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. You see our Cinera bio. We've been around, a community development financial institution that's been around for nearly 30 years. We started out as primarily a low-income housing tax credit investor in the state of Michigan as an effort by the state housing agency to address the lack of investment by investors in urban communities and also rural communities. So we were set up to be the local place-based lender that knew our communities. I've been with Cinera over 20 years, first as an underwriter, and now in my current role as a business development person for both Illinois and Indiana, based out of Indianapolis. But my history is, I started my career at a small community development corporation, so I got to see how neighborhood development worked from the ground, and just throughout my 30-so career, I've been able to grow in various aspects of real estate financing. Now, I have to say that my entire youth I've never sat on a panel like this, so this is pretty amazing for the city for this one. So I'm excited that you're doing this. Some of the primary financing that we do is our financing over the last almost 30 years of existence has been on what the needs of our communities are. We started out as a low-income housing tax credit investing, mostly in urban and rural communities. As we started to grow, we started to see more needs in our community. In some instances, we noticed that in some of our urban communities, on some of the smaller loans, some of our financial institutions weren't interested in providing those loans, so we started a lending company specifically geared toward providing some of the smaller loans for affordable housing and investments. Started to see another need. In some of our communities were having a hard time with getting fair title in some of our urban communities, so we bought a title company to help address that. So over the years, what we've done is we've grown, matured, and now we're at a point in our existence now where this field, unfortunately, is still not diverse on the development side. So we needed to do more. And the developers that are now mature or starting to retire, we need to start working on trying to build up the next bench of developers, mostly trying to diversify and tap community developers. So one of the things that we're starting to do now is we are starting to do a lot more community development lending, which is really focused on some of the emerging developers. One of the other questions I have are, would you consider your borrowers as wealth builders? And that's it's pretty funny. Most of our on the low-income housing tax credit side, yes, wealth builders. On the other end, most of our community development developers, they're emerging developers, so they don't have the access to capital as some of our more seasoned, mature developers have. What they have managed to do, though, is we've seen that they've managed to survive and still do development at the expense of paying higher interest rates. One of the things that we're here to try to do is to identify who those developers are, and also to be able to provide them with some affordable financing that right now they didn't have the capability if you are going through a regular lender. So we're here to try to help bridge that gap to get them affordable financing. Another question for me was, what does working with CDFI friendly South Bend assist a borrower, how do they assist a borrower? I look at how we work is, for me, I cover 2 states. So it's hard for me to be on the ground to know who the emerging local developers are. And one of our mature developers that we've worked with for 20 years is Southfield Heritage Foundation. So outside of Southfield Heritage Foundation, that was the majority of our work. CDFI friendly model comes in with Sam, and what Sam has been able to do is connect us with opportunities that we necessarily would not have seen because we aren't locally based here. We don't have those relationships. So what Sam has been able to do, Sam at CDFI friendly movement, South Bend has been able to bring in opportunities with emerging developers that we ordinarily would not have seen. And what that has allowed us to do is to work with those developers and get them cheaper financing. I'm embarrassed to tell you that a couple of the developers that we've worked with here have been paying for the finance, but we've been able to help a couple here get some affordable financing. And the other part that we've been able to do is that a lot of times in our communities we'll start doing developments and we'll say, well, what are we, how are you getting your financing? And one of the things that we've been able to do is outside of providing them a loan, we've been able to handhold and provide them the technical assistance that they need to secure some of their financing. One of my, the final question I had that was for me is how prepared are business owners to work with a lender? I watch a number of emerging developers that walk into Scenario for financing. And I will tell you, some have been successful with some of the real estate that they've been doing, but they've done it at the expense of having to learn on the job. And one of the things that we see is that no one, they go into the bank and they get a no. Well, how do you get around that no? And one of the things that we've been doing and trying to teach them is trying to show them the correct steps in terms of how do you do real estate development. You go here, this bank tells you they want this. How do you get around mitigating what that risk is in their bank? And what I see a lot is I see a lot of emerging developers that are coming here that no one's ever taken the time to mentor, handhold, provide them affordable financing. And one of the things that we've been doing here is we've been trying to cover that void. So the goal is on our multifamily rental housing is we're hoping that we're able to, families are able to come in, get stabilized with affordable rents, that we hope that one day, if those families are stabilized, that one day they go into home ownership. On the business side and the developer side, we're hoping that we're able to increase the capacity of the local emerging developers so that they're at a point that they're building up the wealth of the community and also themselves, that they're going to have other financial institutions coming after them with a lot more affordable financing.
Thank you, Keith. I do have one question for you. As a follow-up, could you just share with us some of the types of projects that Scenario engages with, and perhaps even just share for a moment the type of partners you pursue these transactions with?
Okay. On the low-income housing tax credit side, we've done a number of deals with our South Bend Heritage Foundation, and that's been most. And one of a couple of the deals we've done with them include the South Bend Mutual Homes, which we took, and it's the only one in the state of Indiana where we took a cooperative model and used low-income housing tax credits, where those residents have control over their homes in terms of the day-to-day management, the decision-making, and after the end of the 50-year compliance period, we'll have the option to leave it as is as rental or be able to sell those homes. On the other end, I'm sorry, go back to your question.
Oh, just some of the types of projects.
Okay.
Daycare centers, multifamily homes.
Yeah, one of the emerging developers that we did with Jordan Richardson just recently was he was acquiring homes, rehabbing them, and then renting them and providing affordable rentals to people in his community. The advantage that we were able to do, what we were able to help with them was providing the technical assistance, take them through the whole process of how we're doing the financing and provide him with some of the affordable housing some of the affordable financing that he didn't have in the past.
Great, thanks so much. Sam?
Well, it's probably good I go right after Keith since he talked about some of the work that we've been doing together. And so my name is Samson Diaz. I've been in South Bend for 13 years. One of the things I wanted to make sure I caveated was that I don't feel like an expert. I always feel like I've just been a community advocate that's just tried really hard to make a difference. And so I'm always here. I'm mostly here at events like this to listen and try to absorb information and try to figure out how we be creative to try to solve problems. That's why I think I'm here. And so CDFI Friendly South Bend was created before I got involved. I've only been involved for about a year with the organization, but initially years ago the conversation was, how cool would it be if we had a CDFI in South Bend that was doing innovative work like CDFIs are doing, like Scenario started in Lansing, right? Or places in Detroit, Chicago, Indianapolis, other parts around the country where they're like, why can't we have what's happening there here in South Bend? Why can't we do that here? And the thought process was, it would take forever to try to stand up 5 different CDFIs that had 5 different purposes. One to do small business lending, one to do affordable housing, one to try to address vacant and abandoned property. Like, it would be all this work and raising all this money to do all these things, to replicate work that's happening in other communities, when we could call Keith and say, hey, can you come and do some work in South Bend? I know people that could use the resources that your company provides and need the financing that your CDFI can provide. So that was the kind of the business model was designed around that. And so my work is really just a matchmaker. So I'm in the community trying to listen to community need, understand what's happening, and then connect people to the best CDFI that I think will fit their needs, whether that's, a group out of Chicago or you name it, right? And so we try to develop those networks. Keith and I work several local opportunities here that we've been able to connect people to great financing. Some of the folks are here, some folks down the pipeline are here as well. And so it's exciting to see that development. I'll share a couple of things that have been a struggle for the organization. So I always like to be transparent about the ways that we're one successful, right? Brag about things we're doing, but around some of the things we're not doing. My joke around CDFI Friendly is that our business was launched in February of 2020. Right? Probably the worst month in the history of time to have a strategic plan about what you're going to do for the next couple of years, right? So we had to refocus, retool, and I came in that process trying to figure out what was next. And one of the things that I know on the talking points that I always like to make sure I cover is around technical assistance. It's one of the biggest benefits that CDFIs bring versus traditional finance is that most CDFIs either require technical assistance to be used by their clients either during, prior, or while they have their loan, but it's something that's an integral part of their process, right? They're going to not just say no, they're going to always start with a maybe, and let's figure out where we can get to. Sometimes it's to great financing, sometimes it's just a good advice. And so that's a big need. So that's the biggest thing that I've seen in the community as a challenge. Whether it's for upcoming developers or upstart small businesses, is just the need for good technical assistance. And that I mean is how do you set up a budget? What does a profit and loss statement look like? And what type of corporation do I need to set up? And I was supposed to file my taxes. So all these things are complicated, and if a business doesn't get that support right away, and now they're 3 years down the pipeline and they've made all these mistakes, it's hard then when you get to them to say, now how do I help? Because now not only do I have to help you get up, now I've got to help you move forward, I've also got to dig you out of this well we're in, right? And so that's part of what I think is, I think one of the biggest benefits that we'll bring to the community through CDFI Friendly is some of the technical assistance and why technical assistance is so important as part of the finance process to our community. I think I covered our question.
Oh, absolutely. I did have one follow-up question for you. And in the role that you're sitting in, could you just share perhaps the biggest barriers that borrowers are bringing to you even before you can refer them to another source of financing?
So there's a couple things. I think, well, there's a couple things, right? Anybody who tells you solving these problems is easy, you have to fix this one thing, is completely wrong. Yeah. So that's part of it. And so I would say that there's a couple things, but one is, in general, trying to understand what the financial institutions want, because they speak a different language, right? So you sit down with a financial institution and they'll walk you through, I mean, they even call it, because they call them products, right? But it's not actually a thing, it's money, right? Like, well, here's the financial product that we have for small businesses. Like, I don't know what it is, like, I can't hold that. And so the language is different. So when they say things like, we want this or that, or I use the easy example of a balance sheet. What's your business balance sheet look like? Or what does revenue look like? You know, and so all of these terms, people are just like, oh my, I don't know any of it. Like, I don't know what that is. And they might already have it all and know, they do actually usually have it all and know it all and understand it all, but in their own way. And so part of what we need to do is figure out how we take like all the things you know and make it make sense for the person who's making decisions. At the same time, I need to get the person who's making decisions to understand that like not everybody knows it the way you know it. And you don't need an MBA from Notre Dame to understand those things, but you can be someone who's been hustling and working hard and you know business better than anybody with a degree, right? So I think that that's part of it is like the translation from side to side of what it is that they actually need in order to get financed.
Great, thanks so much. Marco? Good evening, everyone. I'm Marco Mariani, Executive Director of South Bend Heritage Foundation. I'll try to sum up our story quick because we were formed in 1974. We're often referred to as a Community Development Corporation, and that is a self-applied label. That isn't necessarily a label that we use. It isn't an official designation. It's sort of an industry name that's used for the work that we do as a not-for-profit. So we are a not-for-profit. We have a board of directors, and we do a wide variety of activities all around community building, community and economic development work. And I'll just say that our story, I think, really started, our origin story started with a small group of neighbors that were upset. And they were upset with what they saw happening in South Bend, and after Studebaker closed, and through the 70s and into the 80s, many of the issues we're talking about here today. So the idea of coming together and forming a community development corporation, a nonprofit corporation, to do housing work, to do community organizing work, to listen to people, to hear from people that were affected by all of that policy violence that we just heard about tonight. So that's really our origin and where South Bend Heritage started. And I'd like to say that I think we've had to adapt and evolve over our time to attack all of these challenges and respond to all of these changes in the financing sector. We were one of the first tax credit deals with West Washington Homes in the 90s in the state of Indiana. So I think that our evolution has been the community's evolution in terms of how do we respond to all of these challenges. So our organization has evolved in that time, where hearing from the community, hearing from different city administrations. South Bend Heritage, some of our values have been to be a community partner. We may not always be able to do it perfectly, but we try to partner with government, administrations, organizations, other nonprofit groups, and that's helped us, I think, accomplish the things we've accomplished since 1974. So I think what we've heard over the years from the community has primarily been neighborhood revitalization, community revitalization. I think when South Bend Heritage was formed, there were a lot of difficult things happening in the community, from really difficult public safety issues in certain areas. I think that we spent a lot of time really fighting City Hall and getting City Hall to listen to the things that the community was saying that the community felt needed to happen in neighborhoods. It was a small group of people. We couldn't do a lot of things, but we tried to focus on the areas and initiatives that we could. So at that time, the Near West Side neighborhood, I think, was a place where a lot of the things we've heard about today we really saw happening, from public disinvestment, white flight, crime, the police department doing things they maybe shouldn't do, lack of employment and other things in South Bend Heritage, try to respond and work with the city in that particular area to begin redevelopment. And that's grown
I will say that some of our initial efforts really started around the revolving loan fund. So it was almost like a CDFI before there were CDFIs, where we worked with the Historic Landmarks Foundation. The effort was to try to preserve some of these older historic homes around town that were, maybe they were being burned down, maybe they were being acquired by absentee owners in foreclosure, they were being cut up into apartment rentals that became private properties in neighborhoods. So Southland Heritage began working with local residents that wanted to try to access capital to save some of those houses. And we did that for a long time and then transitioned into actually building affordable housing. So I think today, as we look at Southland Heritage, our focus continues to be affordable housing, and it's become, I think, more and more competitive to do it from a tax credit perspective. It's very difficult to win a tax credit award in any community today. So we've been fortunate to work hard and put together good applications to build Robertson's downtown, which was a tax credit deal. Robertson's, that department store sat vacant for many years. And Southland Heritage said, well, maybe we can turn it into senior housing. We know the community needs more senior housing, and we worked to put a deal together and turn it into senior housing. We still operate it as that today. Rushton Senior Apartments, another historic building on the edge of downtown that sat vacant for many years. We worked with Historic Landmarks, Scenair, and we were fortunate enough to turn that into 23 units of senior housing on the edge of the historic district for West Washington Historic District in downtown. So anchor projects, development brings more development. We certainly believe that, and we're continuing to do that kind of work today. Of late, there's been a priority for permanent support housing in our community. And we've been fortunate enough to work with some partners at the University of to build Oliver Apartments in the southeast neighborhood. These are difficult developments. It's difficult to try to house people experiencing homelessness, but we believe it's important. Our board believes it's important. We think it's a health issue for our community. It's a public safety issue. It's a dignity issue. And we're very proud to be focused on that. We continue to be focused on it. We just opened Hope Avenue Homes, which is another 22-unit permanent supportive housing development. This was a non-tax credit effort, another competitive process. I will say that, I think the state of Indiana, they're, awakening to these affordable housing issues across the state and the need for permanent supportive housing. And their willingness to create new set-asides in the tax credit program or other funding sources to promote that kind of development is really an amazing thing. And I think they're continuing to do more of that across the state, so we're happy to be a part of that. I'll stop there.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Pam.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Pam Meyer. I am the Chief Neighborhood Officer for the City of South Bend in the Department of Community Investment. I have worked with the city for close to 4 decades in the same department. I was asked tonight to speak a little bit about our federal programs, and particularly our Community Development Block Grant Program. And that is something that my division is responsible for managing. I would say to you, in looking up some of the historical data to try to find what happened years ago, the CDBG program, which is called Community Development Block Grant, is a federally funded and based initiative that came after Model Cities and transitioned Model Cities into this new type of funding effort. It was effective and first funded in 1975, and I'm fairly certain, although I cannot commit this to all of you tonight, that South Bend received funding as an initial entitlement community way back then. It's a formula-based program. It's impacted certainly by federal appropriations and other things that are happening in the country. How many entitlement cities there are, because your formula is based on things like population, income, poverty rate, etc. We have, on average, between the years of 2013 and 2021, received about $2.6 million annually from this fund to do activities in the community. while there can be a wide range of activities that you can do with these resources, 2.6 million doesn't go very far. And we know that particularly in today's world. But we have done various projects and activities in the community, things like infrastructure, curbs and walks, a variety of housing type programs, and I'll get back to that in a minute, but also public facilities like the Civil Rights Heritage Center, the Pasadena Stad, things that I could just think of off the top of my head, a host of public service agency support to support services that they're providing to individuals throughout the community. But often in the early years, the CDBG program was one of the first and only types of local programs that really was used and available to provide affordable housing in the community. So it's interesting because Gar had asked me, oh, are you guys repurposing your CDBG funds to use them for housing? And I said, we don't really have to repurpose them because that has been the primary project or activity that we have funded in all of those almost 40 years. Now, that doesn't mean that we have, created with those particular dollars thousands of units, because every aspect of what we fund for CDBG is sometimes an individual house that's built, it's sometimes a duplex, it's sometimes leveraging other resources, so it may be money that's put into a larger project that has additional resources from places around the state or the community. But all of the activities related to that funding source called CDBG has to have, at the end of its result, benefited someone who's low and moderate income, which means by that particular program's definition, 80% or below median income level. So I was also asked to talk about, well, what are the benefits of doing housing with this particular funding source. And so it clearly expands for a population of low and moderate income individuals rental housing. It clearly expands opportunities for home ownership. It provides decent, safe, sanitary housing, all built to a particular standard. We all recognize, I think, that decent housing and a decent living environment, which is one of the purposes of the CDBG program, can help lessen some of the negative social outcomes we might see in a community if an individual does not have that as part of their life. If we're providing resources to an entity to rehab a house, we're taking an underutilized, usually vacant property, putting it back to life, adding tax rolls, adding to the tax base. And if it is a property where someone is able to purchase a home, we are offering an opportunity, because we have subsidized the purchase of that home, because the home is generally costs way more to build than it would be appraised at, and an individual who is at a low and moderate income level needs a subsidy often to purchase a home. So we do that through our variety of sub-recipients. We also fund other programs that help to provide financing and reduce the cost of I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. No problem. Anyway, the point is that part of what I was asked about was why, I think it was meant to be, why is home ownership important? And home ownership has continued to be important and is part of our planning in community development use, because we believe it stabilizes neighborhoods. It gives pride to a person who's owning a home. It allows them to be more invested in their neighborhood. It helps them build a future and hopefully build a well, of course.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you. Good evening. Good to see so many good-looking people, good, friendly people in the audience. This is great to be seeing familiar faces. My name is Luis Zapata. Luis Antonio Zapata Gallo, that's a full name, but we'll leave it at that, right? Telenovelas in Mexico, for those of you who already know, but we have long names. I work for First Source Bank. I've been working for First Source Bank for 16 years. I came to the United States in 2004 to look in Notre Dame to get an MBA there, Sam. So yeah, I still don't know how to read those things, but I have a degree. And in 2006, I started working as a corporate trainee for the bank. And I developed into a market manager, and I run branches, and now I'm in charge of financial education for First Source Bank. So we usually are seeing these type of firms as the bad guys of the story, right? As the financial institutions don't want to lend money. So I'm going to tell you what a bank is, and then I'll go. Hopefully, I'll have enough time, so I don't get stop here. Okay. And so a bank is just like Walmart. Walmart buys and sells milk, right? We don't buy and sell milk at the bank, but rarely, right? So but Walmart buys it for $2 and sells it for $3, right? We do the same thing. We buy and sell. Our product is money, right? We buy money and we sell money. Who do we buy the money from? You, right? Who do we sell it to? You, right? So we become intermediaries from users of funds and suppliers of funds. They're not our funds. They're yours, right? That you're supporting your community. So we're just that intermediary that connects those funds in the community that they need. And we only survive as an organization, a for-profit organization, if we make loans. So the first thing I wanted to address, banks want to make loans. Otherwise, I want to be sitting here with luckily a nice salary and I can support my family, right? We want to do loans. Now, how do you do them? That's the key part of the story. I want to talk about our mission, First Source mission, because that's something I love. There's certain things that the bank will need to do better, but one thing that we have perfect, I think, in my opinion, is our mission. Our mission is to help individuals achieve financial security, build wealth, and realize their dreams. Notice that it doesn't say make $50 million a year, which we do, and it's very profitable business, but we do it the right way by helping people achieve financial security, build wealth, and realize their dreams. Right? So if I help you, I help the black community to get a loan, you're going to have access to wealth, to buy a house, start a business, and we're going to make money doing that, being your partner. That's why we call your partners from the first, right? So enough of the First Source commercial. They asked me to tell you how we do through financial education, how we connect with individuals. So I'll tell you a quick story. This involves Sam too. I started as a volunteer with First Source doing community outreach, just doing presentations. Because Mr. Murphy, our CEO, told me, hey, Luis, I want you to support a Hispanic initiative in the diocese, Catholic diocese, 4 weeks South Bend, do presentations. So I started doing presentations. I fell in love with teaching. As a teacher at IUSB, and my wife says, don't give him the microphone because he won't let it go. You're witnessing that. And I love going in and teaching. But one of the things Mr. Murphy asked me is, how is it going? And I thought, profit. So we need to get accounts. When I teach, I need to open accounts. So he asked me, how is it going? And I said, well, it's great, I love it, but we're not opening accounts. He's like, don't worry about that. What do you mean, don't worry about that? He said, that'll come later. You worry about making your communities strong because we are only a reflection of the communities that we serve. Change. Now, I no longer worry, I don't sell. I actually, in my presentation, say, I'm not here to sell you First Source. I'll share my mission because I love it, but I'm not here to sell you anything. So, through this process, we want to help people. And story about Sam, they had a program called Adelante America, teenagers. They invited me to do a savings presentation one day. And I did a presentation, didn't think anything of it. 6 months later, to my branch, because I didn't have this job full time yet, this 12, 13-year-old girl comes and sees me and, hey, do you remember me? Of course you say, yeah, sure, right? But I didn't remember her. She's like, how wasn't that an Atlanta America program where you talked about savings? This is my dad. He needs to open a savings account because we need to save money. That's when it clicked what Mr. Murphy told me. That it will come later. Because now we have somebody bringing money, and now we have more money so that our business owners can borrow it, and we can lend. So in 2014, I told the person on the bench who says, then I said, we need to do this full time. Let me do it full time. Like, think about it. Take an employee who's producing in the branches and putting full time with his salary in a new thing that we don't know how it's going to go. They say yes. So since then, I've been doing presentations, Goodwill Center for the homeless, companies. And what we do is go out in the community trying to teach good financial management. Not only because I love it, but because we have to. I see Mark Gold here, our CRA officer. He won't let me lie. Right? We have the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. We have all these regulators that come and see, hey, how much are you investing in the community? How much you're lending for houses and businesses in low to moderate income census tracts, and how much you're servicing the community with financial education. So we do it because we have to, but if you connect that, we do it because it's the right thing to do, and it makes you money in the long run. That's how a good country based on capitalism is run. When you do the right thing, you can build the own thing. So we do about 400 presentations per year throughout the bank. I personally do about 240. We impact, over these past 8 years, we have impacted about 24,000 individuals, and the majority of my attendees are African Americans and low to moderate income individuals. They care, they want to learn, they want to prosper. So that's great that we have the opportunity to engage them one-on-one. Now, how do we go forward? We need to take ownership of their success. Antonio and I discussed this a few months ago, where it's not only like, I had the savior syndrome. I'm going to go teach a class and they'll be fine. They're going to be rich in 2 years, right? Because I taught the class. But it's not that. It's, I have to teach the class, and I have to be there to be their financial coach, and I have to be there to make sure, like Sam said, get them ready so that they can apply for a loan, speaking the same language that the bankers use. So that's our job that we're doing at First Source, and very happy to collaborate with anybody that would like our help. I want to thank our panel for joining us today, especially thanking Garvester Kelly for moderating this panel. And because we're a little bit tight on time, I'm going to pose a question to the entire panel, and folks go ahead and chime in as you so choose, and then we're going to close out and get ready for our next presentation. The one key question that I'd like to ask you guys is, how can we infuse wealth building and financial empowerment into the services that you currently provide? Details?
I'll take it. Build that financial empowerment center that you're trying to build with our friends from New York. Yeah.
I think you have to be intentional. You have to say, I have this goal of not only saying I'm going to teach these classes, but I'm going to have these number of new individuals with homes through loans that we gave that previously couldn't get financed. So the intention of setting goals for specific communities until you don't have to measure those anymore.
The other quick answer would be, we have to be steadfast and focused, right? So complicated issues that have existed for decades and years and years and years aren't going to be solved in a 6-month plan, right? So oftentimes, we see it in politics, is if it's not solved in 9 months, scrap it and start over, right? We've got to be focused. It takes steps. We've got to stop the bleeding while also trying to move forward, right? So there's a lot of things that have to happen. And I think in my, 15 years of doing advocacy work, that's what I've often seen is people start getting to the solution and they give up too soon, or they don't see progress fast enough, they either don't adjust or scrap it. So we've just got to be focused. We have to keep moving forward. We have to keep making change, and keep that end goal in mind that we're trying to get to.
I think I would be remiss if I didn't let Gar go ahead and close this up.
All I want to do is say, please give our panelists a round of applause and thank you again.
Next up, we will have a presentation on the local impact of redlining in our community by Joe Russo.
Thank you, Antonius. All right, folks, my name is Joe P. Russo. I am an EnFocus intern, and I am also a graduate student at Indiana University Bloomington, pursuing a Master in Public Affairs. And a lot of my research over the last couple of months has been researching the racial wealth divide here in South Bend. So, in this presentation, some of the things that I'm going to go over are I'm going to talk about the legacy of redlining in South Bend neighborhoods. I'm going to talk about Black South Bend neighborhoods versus overall city statistics, that kind of comparison. I'm going to talk about the dramatic decline of West Side neighborhood occupancy and an estimation of neighborhood wealth. Now, one of the things that I'm really glad to have been hearing from a lot of our panelists and from our last presenter from the Federal Reserve is the focus on home ownership and home values as a indicator of wealth, because that is a lot of how I focused my research for this blueprint and this presentation. So, first off, I'm just going to start by talking about redlining as a whole. For the uninitiated, it is a discriminatory home loan practice that started in the 1930s and was essentially allowed banks to deny funding or offer or allow them to offer inflated interest rates to residents of neighborhoods based on redlining designations. These redlining designations were grades from A to D that were essentially told you what the racial composition of the neighborhood was, and the lower the grade, oftentimes not oftentimes, it was the higher amount of black population that was in those neighborhoods. So one of the analyses that I ran was I compared the 1933 redlining designations to the 2020 home values in South Bend, and what I found was a neighborhood that had an A rating in 1933 from Holk has a median home value of about $143,000, and a neighborhood with a D rating has a median home value of about $37,000. And I'm going to point out on my screen here, I'm going to point something out on the screen here. There we go, okay. All right, here we go, laser point. I'm going to point out these neighborhoods, which are the neighborhoods of focus. This is Kennedy and LaSalle Park, and then, and these green neighborhoods, which are some of South Bend's richer neighborhoods. And what we're going to see next on the next map is a comparison that I ran, so you can kind of see this difference in housing values more explicitly. So this is a neighborhood view. So these dollar amounts that you see here are what you have for Kennedy and LaSalle Park. Those are the median home values in 2020. $38,000 for Kennedy Park, $29,000 for LaSalle Park. So those are those neighborhood medians versus these A-graded in 1933 neighborhoods, which you're seeing home values in the mid 100,000 range. So those are generally your Notre Dame East Side neighborhoods, and then over here you're seeing our neighborhoods of interest. So now, since it kind of feels like showing you that map, it feels a little bit like cherry picking, showing the richest neighborhoods and the poorest neighborhoods in town. So I also compared what we see in Kennedy and LaSalle Park to what we see in South Bend as a whole. So as you can see, these are all 2020 statistics. In South Bend as a whole,
we have 25%, it's a 25% black population in South Bend. Kennedy and LaSalle Park have about 60% black population. And when you compare the home values of these different neighborhoods against the city as a whole, it's fairly staggering to see. Kennedy Park is about 40,000 versus the city median of 90,000, or LaSalle Park's 30,000 compared to the city's 90,000. That's about a half of a third. Home ownership rates are generally lower in Kennedy and LaSalle Park than they are in the city of South Bend as a whole. And then the other metric of interest is income. Income is also a pretty interesting statistic to be looking at here. For the city of South Bend, the median household is making $43,000. In Kennedy Park, it's about $20,000, and in LaSalle Park, it's about $13,000. And when you compare those income levels to the federal poverty line guidelines for the average households in those neighborhoods, both neighborhoods are below the poverty line. Finally, unemployment statistics in 2020, which the caveat here is a lot of this data was likely collected during the COVID-19 pandemic, but unemployment is much higher in these largely black neighborhoods than it is in the city of South Bend as a whole. In Kennedy Park, it's twice as high as the city of South Bend, and in LaSalle Park, it's about 4 times as high. So the other thing I'm going to talk about is the decline in occupancy in South Bend. There's a lot of information on this slide, but the main thing that I would point you to, and this is all information that is in the booklet as well, the main thing I would point you to, though, is going back to 1960 to 2020. So we see in North Shore Triangle, Morris Park, Sunny neighborhoods. These are the richer A-grade neighborhoods back in 1933. Over time, the number of households has stayed relatively consistent. There's maybe been a bit of a dip, but overall it stayed fairly consistent since 1960 or 1970, depending on what I was able to get the data for. In Kennedy Park, there's been a decline of 753 households, which from 1,245 households to 492, which is almost a two-thirds decrease in households. And in LaSalle Park, we have seen a decrease in 238 households over the same period. So not only have our home values very low in these neighborhoods, but we are also seeing that there has been a sharp decline in residency. So finally, what this brings us to is this estimation of neighborhood wealth. And the way we calculated this was by taking the number of owner-occupied houses multiplied by the median of that year. And what you see is there always existed a gap. There always existed a gap from 1960, but the amount of wealth that has been in these neighborhoods through home ownership has declined very significantly. For Kennedy Park, you're seeing a decline from about 70 million for that entire neighborhood to maybe about 10 million. And you're seeing a decline of about 40 to 10 million in LaSalle Park as well. So it's a lot of data, it's a lot of information, it's a lot of numbers. So some reflections to take with this. Are some of these things that we're seeing with housing symptoms? Are they causes of this divide? Are they merely correlations with what we see in redlining, with what we see in the communities? And something important to think about is how do we move forward? What are the steps forward to close this divide? And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Antonio. Thank you.
Again, thank you all for coming. And also, help me in welcoming our panel with one round of applause once everyone is seated. To my left. To my left, we have again Joe Russo, who is our presenter today. We have Gladys Muhammad, who has worked with the South Bend Heritage Foundation. We have Ann Mannix, who has also worked with South Bend Heritage Foundation, has also been a part, has been a developer for South Bend Mutual Homes. To my right, we have the superintendent of
Assistant Superintendent of College Workforce Readiness. Like you.
long names. And then, of course, we have Kay Farlow, who is the founder of Healing Power Center here in the city of South Bend. I think we'll have a little bit more of a conversational flow to our panel. And so I'm going to start this kind of in a similar fashion to the way that the last one came. In terms of the programming that you guys offer, how can we increase wealth building for our community?
Well,
Would you pass down, sir? And
Oh, okay. Well, one thing I do is work with 466 Works, Cy Barker. And raise your hand, Cy. Anyway, they're a great group, and they work to increase home ownership for minorities of all kinds in the southeast neighborhood. And they've done about 13 houses are either completed and sold or under construction. So I think we need to expand those opportunities. In the tax credit realm, we get these tax credit projects, but how can we make them benefit the people that live there and have more minority developers? Because there are 2 minority developers of tax credits in the state of Indiana. And those developers, all tax credit developers, it's a very lucrative opportunity. So how can we get more minority tax credit developers? And the state just put out a request for proposals, and they're setting aside 2 projects for specifically minority or women developers. And Keith had worked on that. So I think that is a step forward. And then having a co-op, a tax credit development where the residents have control of the property, they set the rents, they have an opportunity to make decisions about it in 15 years. I think that's another way. So we have to creatively look at projects and see how can we use a minority equity lens. How can the people who live there or the people who do the work get money out of it? It's not, we don't want to just give people places to live, but how can they accumulate wealth?
Thanks. The next question is for South Bend Schools Cabinet. A common thing that residents that we keep hearing is that residents are willing to participate and seek more education. Can you share some of the pivots that you've made with the CTE program, specifically in terms of building trades, to help folks to become more educated in, I think, financially empowering careers, as well as creating some equity opportunities in our neighborhood?
Absolutely. So, Cy, I'll throw it to you again. 466 Works is one of the partners that South Bend Schools has come alongside for that neighborhood. Our building trades program is in the middle of building yet another home. I think of work like the cross-community work. Shout out to the Pattons. And all the work they're doing in their neighborhoods, and the many other folks who are doing amazing work in neighborhoods that have taken responsibility for the neighborhoods. As much as anything, those projects are amazing among the adults. However, recently I was asked, well, where's all the workers? We can't get enough workers. Where are the construction kids, Chad? You know, where are they at? And I'm telling you, we have an amazing, talented 7,000 kids between the ages of 7th and 12th grades right now who are so talented, and we're not tapping and developing them to the degree that we need to tap and develop them. So in the South Bend schools, we've come alongside not keeping our programs over the last 4 or 5 years as external, as quiet, as, well, you know, that's vocational technical education. Real kids go to college to become ready. We have flipped that on its ear. The truth is, our kids have gifts and abilities, whether it be in the trades, whether it be in entrepreneurship across all pathways, that need to be developed, grown, throughout. So in the South Bend schools, not only within the building trades, but across every sector you could think about, we've grown by 40% in the last almost 5 years. Our programs have expanded. The adage that if you just go get a diploma, you just go off to college, and you'll be just fine, is not true. 10% of the kids who go off to college 5 years after they're done with their major at college are using what they learned in a degree during that time. Less than 10%. Less than 40% of that 10% comes anywhere close to using that to pay for what they just went. Now, I'm not opposed to financial loans and all that for our colleges, but we need to have meaningful programming tied to our industry partners, our governmental partners, that helps our kids land on their feet in a way that when they decide to go off to school, or trade school, or along with our apprenticeships, internships, all that sort of thing,